Rarity felt a little guilty about borrowing the scroll she had found on the ancient table. But she couldn't help herself. She'd never seen magic like that before, but she knew that if she asked Twilight to explain it, she'd get another lecture. And yet she enjoyed lectures. At least she thought she did. Maybe she didn't. She hated admitting it to herself, but she was jealous of the purple pony. Ever since she had arrived in Ponyville on Celestia's ticket, she had been jealous. She had enjoyed her position as one of the most powerful magic users in the town up until that point. Certainly there had been better magicians in Canterlot, where she had grown up, but in this town she had been revered for her skill. If not her skill itself, then the products of her skill, the finest clothing this side of Hoofington. And then she had shown up. And ever since that incident with the braggart Trixie, she had been the go-to pony for skill with the arcane. Rarity didn't hate Twilight, far from it. She enjoyed the mayor's company. It wasn't even a raging jealousy of her magic that she felt. The best way she could put it was inadequacy, embarrassment. She felt outdone and outperformed, though she certainly knew that that wasn't Twilight's intention. She wasn't used to feeling like this. The uncertainty of the feeling was almost as bad as the feeling itself. Today's lesson was the clincher, even though she had succeeded with the spell. Rarity shook her head when she entered the shop, locking the door behind her. She wasn't sure if she wanted to outdo or impress her fellow magician when she had asked for lessons in the first place. Maybe she didn't want to do either. Well, what she was sure of, though, was that her first real step was this. She was going to fix this. She flattened the stolen scroll out on her table and peered over the words. Most of them she didn't recognize, but she didn't care. She didn't know what this scroll did. She didn't care about that either. She recalled Twilight's lesson on incanting spells and started to speak the words slowly and carefully. She felt her eyes getting heavier with each word, and her horn glowed slightly, casting a purple light on the scroll. When she reached the last few words, she relented, closing her eyes and reciting the last bits from memory. She wasn't sure if she lost consciousness or not. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't in Equestria anymore. She was at her home in Canterlot. In front of her was a table, with a single needle and strand of thread sitting on top of a sheet of fabric. At the other end of the table was her mother, though much younger than she was now. Her youthful face was bright with a smile as she motioned with her hoof towards Rarity. "Go on, dear. What did you want to show Mummy?" Rarity looked at the thread before her, and without really thinking, tried to levitate the needle as she'd done earlier. Nothing happened. She tried again. Nothing. She stared at the needle intently, willing it with all her might to move just a single inch. The metal pin remained stubbornly in place. Her mother frowned. "What's the matter, dear?" Rarity looked up at her with a reassuring smile as she continued to try and move the needle. She became more and more frustrated the more she kept at it, as the seconds ticked agonizingly by. Why couldn't she do it? This shouldn't be happening. This was supposed to be easy. She practiced for hours. Her mother was waiting. She wanted so badly to impress her just once, just to be a great designer like her. She began to cry out of pure helplessness at her own failure. No matter how hard she tried, the pin refused to budge. She turned her face upwards, tears in her eyes, to face her mother, and found something in her expression that made her break down completely. Disappointment. She was back in the ancient ruined castle, facing down Nightmare Moon. She turned around to find her friends, but discovered that she was the only one in the room. She steeled herself. It was up to her. She had to stop the God Queen from bringing eternal night to Equestria. Nightmare Moon laughed. "The hero! Is that what you fancy yourself as?" Her horn glowed a deep black, and Rarity found herself lifted up into the air, unable to move. She laughed harder, almost a frenzied cackle. "Do you know what happens to heroes?" She was at her workbench, staring at dozens of sketched designs over dozens of sheets of paper. Each one was rough, undetailed, and terrible. The floor of her shop was littered with tattered bits of fabrics, rolls of string, and discarded sewing implements. She was in front of her shop now, but the building was decaying and most of the paint had been chipped away. Windows were broken, there was no one around her, and the sun was covered by thick, black, angry clouds. Rain poured incessantly down upon her coat. Upon the door was a sign that said, "Closed." She was in front of her friends, each one looking at her with an angry glare on their faces, as if she had mortally offended them. She wanted to say something, to say hello, or to ask what the matter was, but each one of them turned away from her in turn. She tried to speak and nothing came out of her mouth. One by one she was left behind, when at the end all that remained was Twilight Sparkle, who wore the grimmest expression of the five. She narrowed her eyes and spoke a word that had no sound. She was in a grassy field, fully lit by Celestia's bright summer sun. It wasn't too hot. There was a cooling breeze that sifted through the tall tufts of grass, making them sway with a comforting, shuffling noise. The field was peppered with yellow flowers, and in the distance she just saw more rolling hills. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. She turned around as if by instinct. Behind her was a single apple tree, the only one she could see, with the shape of a pony underneath it. She trotted towards the tree, curiously, trying to make out the shape. She was nearly upon the small figure when she recognized the purple and white mane. "Sweetabelle!" Rarity called out. The filly turned to look at her with a smile on her face. "Hey, big sis, come join me!" She did, closing the distance between them and sitting down in the shade of the tree. Her sister offered her an apple, which she took happily, munching on the snack. Neither spoke for several minutes, both admiring the scenery before them. Sweetabelle broke the silence. "You hate her." "Who, dear?" "Twilight. You hate her." "I don't hate Twilight, Sweetabelle." "That's not true, and you know it. You hate her." "Who told you this?" "You want her to die. You want to kill her. You want to show every pony that you're better than her. Look, there she is now." Rarity turned. A purple unicorn was standing not 10 feet away from them. Her mouth moved as if she was calling out Rarity's name, but she could barely hear her. She turned back to her sister, who was looking at her with a deadpan expression. "Prove it to them. I know you can do it." Rarity recoiled, getting to her hooves. She looked between her sister and Twilight, growing more frantic. "Sweetabelle, what are you saying? What's going on?" She heard her name being called by Twilight again, but the sound still reached her as if from a great distance, though closer than the last time. When she turned back to her sister, she was gone, replaced by the black, smoky shape that only vaguely resembled a pony. The shape spoke to her in Sweetabelle's voice. "It's what you want, isn't it?" "No!" She heard her name again over the silence. "Why? What has she ever done for you except humiliate you?" "She has done no such thing! Twilight is my friend!" The shape ignored her tone and spoke in the same deadpan drawl. "No, she's not. Go on. No one will ever know." "I'll know!" "Irrelevant. You're not leaving this place until you do." Rarity had never felt such rage in her life. Rage at things she couldn't even remember. Rage at the shape in front of her, and rage at her own helplessness. It all washed over her like a wave, and just as suddenly as it had come upon her, it was replaced by a single image. A small teacup filled with ice. She looked the shape directly where its eyes should have been, and lit her horn with magical energy. She narrowed her eyes, delving deep into the shape, and finding that core she knew would exist. She tore, violently and as hard as she could, the core from her shape. The world around her flashed a brilliant white, and the sound stopped, and she heard her name again, louder than ever before. "Rarity!" Twilight shouted. She opened her eyes to find the purple unicorn standing over her, with Sweetabelle behind her, tears in her eyes. She blinked a few times to make sure that the world was real. It was. She launched herself upwards and enveloped Twilight in a hug, squeezing her as tight as she could. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." To be concluded.